Good afternoon. I will call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council. It's June 20th, 2023. We got a pretty much of a full house here, everybody. Good to see y'all. I will also note that it is Councilmember Carter's birthday, so happy birthday.
Happy birthday to you.
Okay, I won't make you sing.
Committee members, just to know, we need to be finished by 5:45 today so that Greg can set up for the next meeting. And also, we will not meet on July 3rd. And so we won't meet again until July 17th. I know it's going to be quite a while. So,
We're a big name.
yeah, we'll have to. Yeah, we'll get going to it. It's almost a month. So, great. And let's move to the agenda. There's an agenda before us. Committee members, if there's no changes or suggestions, I'll just take that as approved. Approve the agenda. And the next on the agenda is the approval of the June 5th, 2023 Community Development Committee minutes. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Motion to amend. The committee endured the substitute chair,
I'm sure you did a wonderful job.
but we got through it. I'll second.
Thank you. Any additions, corrections, amendments, discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. And so we're on to our non-consent business items. The first is item 2023-138. It's the funding recommendations for the 2023 Round 1 Tax Base Revitalization Account. And we have Mr. Martin here today. Welcome.
All right, thank you.
Martin.
Are you guys hearing me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for putting this item on your agenda on this nice summer day. As the Chair said, my name is Marcus Martin. I'm the coordinator for the Tax-Based Revitalization Account. I'm going to start with some background. For some of you, that might be a little bit familiar, but for anyone who's new and listening in. So let me make sure I click and keep on pace here. All right. So there are 4 active grant programs in the LCA. The Livable Communities Demonstration Account. That is for projects that provide affordable housing, support economic opportunity, improve connections, and develop sustainably or more equitably. There's also the Transit-Oriented Development Account. That is for projects that are similar to the LCDA, but typically have higher densities, more active uses, and are intended to encourage pedestrian use and activity and increase the use of transit. There's also the Local Housing Incentives Account. That is for production and preservation of affordable and rental and ownership housing, I should say. And that helps municipalities meet their negotiated LCA housing goals. And then the program we will focus on today, the Tax-Based Revitalization Account, or TBRA, is for projects that support redevelopment on properties with environmental contamination. All right. So you may have seen this slide earlier when Stephen Klimek applied. All of the LCA programs have some shared goals. Creating more housing choices throughout the region is one goal. Supporting the growth of living wage jobs. Improving connections where people live and work, and regional amenities like regional parks. And supporting more equitable development outcomes. So participation in LCA is voluntary. There are currently 76 cities participating in the program. Applicants to the grants are cities, counties, or development authorities who partner with developers on individual projects. And projects are shown can be projects that where people can apply, or rather applicants can apply, are in that area shown in yellow on the map. So this is just another way of looking at the LCA programs. LCA grant programs provide financial support and incentives across the stages of development. And so the TBRA program is offering grant categories that help with planning and design, as well as environmental remediation before starting construction. All right, we'll get a little bit more specific.
Marcus, just a question from
Yes.
Councilmember Vento, please.
If you've said this, I totally missed it, Marcus, and I apologize, but on slide 3, under who can apply, it says participating cities and townships, and there's an asterisk there.
I believe the asterisk is more about that, in terms of the township part, I think. And let me see it again here. Yeah, I'm afraid I don't specifically know if that asterisk is for the townships or for a
Okay.
different applicant. But I know that it's limited to those shown there.
Okay, okay.
Do you know?
Mr. Chair, I think the asterisk is left over from a different presentation.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
recalling
All
this
right,
in
I'm-
another presentation, but I don't remember what it was referring to, but it was different.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martin.
So the TBRA program, more specifically, it encourages the private market to address the legacy of contamination that limits development throughout the region, focus on one project at a time. You might ask me how we do that. Well, we help pay for studies that specify what types of environmental issues there are or challenges that are specific to a redevelopment site. And we want to know specific things like what types of chemicals there are, what the concentrations of those chemicals are, how the future users might come in contact with those chemicals, contaminants, hazardous materials. And so, for example, the investigation grants can help developers better understand what is needed to make that property safe for redevelopment. So once we know that, those issues about the property, we want to know a little bit about that solution, the best solution for it, and what are the costs of that cleanup. All right, let's turn a little bit to this year here. All right, so the council approved up to $5.5 million to be awarded in 2 funding cycles earlier this spring. Applications are due in May and November. So those are dates that I circle on my calendar. And each time we offer 3 types of TBRA grants. So the site investigation grants, also known as environmental site assessment sometimes, the environmental cleanup grants, and then the Seeding Equitable Environmental Development Grants, or SEED grants. And those are intended to encourage redevelopment on strategic sites in areas with low levels of building activity, or they may have higher concentrations of low-wage jobs, or low incomes, or people of color, they may or may not have a specific project, but should show potential for jobs or housing creation. So how do we do this? We look at what are the expected project outcomes. For TBRA, those are things like increasing the tax base, adding affordable housing or living wage jobs, and looking at the relative risks posed by the contaminants. We look at how thoroughly projects have conducted their community engagement, and we look at the representative aspects of the development team, so as well as their capacity and readiness to start with a project. All right, so now we're ready to get into this cycle here now. So we received 5 seed applications. Those were from the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. 2 investigation applications from Fridley and Minneapolis, and 11 cleanup applications. And those were located in the cities of Excelsior, Maplewood, Minneapolis, St. Paul, including the St. Paul Port Authority, and South St. Paul. So the total requested was nearly $4 million. Looks like I made an error in this slide here. It should have been 3.9 instead of 4.9, so almost $4 million. There are some statutory limits. The guiding statute limits the amount of funding that can be awarded to projects in a single city. That's 50%. And projects located in Minneapolis and St. Paul combined, that's 75%. So based on the funding we have made available this cycle, those limits are $1,375,000 and $2,062,500. We also have a maximum award amount for investigation purposes, and that limit is $50,000 per project. So let's look at the review recommendations. All right, starting with the seed applications. In this case, we're recommending funding for 3 investigation projects. Let me see here. As you can see on the screen here, Ham's Brewery redevelopment, $50,000. Nicollet project, $12,400. And East Plymouth Heights, $30,100. We're recommending funding for 2 environmental site investigations. That is for the 753 Washington Avenue North project, $39,500, and Northern Stacks 9 for $50,000. And we are recommending, was those there? I'll give it a pause. And then we are also recommending 7 cleanup requests for funding. So that is for the Unity Building. Excuse me, I have to blow this up here a little bit bigger. Got to get those new glasses. 296,500. Agate Housing, 213,500. United Village Phase 1, 652,400. Wooddale Station, 428,000. Prior Works Creative Enterprise Zone, 174,900. Kyle Garden Square, 172,000. And 339 3rd Street, 250,300. All right, so that brings us to the totals. So a total of $2,369,600 is recommended for funding. The total meets the funding limits for a single city, that's St. Paul in this case, and the combined limit for Minneapolis and St. Paul. And the balance of funding that is shown here, $380,400, would be made available in the next TBRA funding cycle in November. So we have a total of 6 projects that are not recommended for funding. 2 of the seed applications did not have a competitive score. Those had related to issues mostly with lower tax base, sometimes didn't have enough of the community engagement started at the time of the application. And then in the case of the St. Paul application, they didn't have the preferred developer status assigned yet. And in the case of the Freya Mill, there was more information that they weren't quite sure what their land uses were going to be. They had kind of all of the above, which makes it harder to do the appropriate cleanup for them. So we had 4 of the cleanup applications also did not have a competitive score and are not recommended for funding. This is the Stinson Apartments. Those had a modest number of affordable units. It did have a minimal amount of living wage jobs. It did have just the start of their community engagement process. The Wakota North site, this site had a moderate number of new and retained jobs, but it did have, as is common in an industrial site, kind of a lower relative density and with that kind of a lower potential for transit usage. It did have minimal community engagement at this stage, similar to some of the other ones, and somewhat lower readiness than we expected of the competitors. All right, and the last 2 of the 4 cleanup projects also not recommended funding were the Serenity Senior Home. In this case, there was no projected increase in the tax base. They had, again, kind of a lower relative density for the site when you take in the entire campus. They had not yet started their community engagement, and they were somewhat, again, moderately ready to go. And then last is Coretta and Maplewood, who project that did not have any affordable units, some low potential for job growth. Again, it's kind of that lower density and lower transit potential. And it was seen as a lower health risk relative to the other projects. And again, that community engagement hadn't quite started yet. So in closing, the recommendation to this committee is that the Metropolitan Council award 12 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $2,369,600, shown in Table 1 in the business item, and authorize the Executive Director of the Community Development Department to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Questions on that report? Yeah, Councilmember Pimentel.
This is a strange question, but there's a little voice in my head saying, don't ask it, but I'm going to go ahead. Where it says lower environmental health risk posed by contaminants relative to competitors, what kinds of contaminants are those that are considered a lower health risk?
So it depends mostly on the type of contaminant, the relative risk that those place in terms of like how exposed people are at right now and how they will be later, and the concentration of those. So it varies. It's not so much by each type, but it varies by what it is and how much of it and where it is.
Okay. I guess my only concern is that there are some contaminants that perhaps could pass that test, but would be really a serious risk, you know, just because of the type of contaminant they are and the way they invade. But yeah, that question wasn't intended to second guess the scoring process at all. It was just out of curiosity. The whole environmental health risk continues to really concern me, and I always am glad to see these recommendations come through. I really appreciate the thorough process. And I'm glad that the environmental health piece is part of it. I hope we can continue to really push that because it's a critical issue, and it's going to get worse as our climate gets worse, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion on the report? Councilmember Johnson.
Just briefly, on the first groups that applied in the scoring, is it a 50-point ceiling and then a 100-point ceiling in each of the groups?
For
total points.
Yes, it's 70 total for the investigation and the seed grants.
Oh, okay.
And then 150 total for the
Okay.
cleanup. So half of those is the cutoff.
Okay.
Half of those points in each category.
Okay, just wanted to better understand that. And then just a question on this. So the remainder, will that be the only amount then that's available for the November tranche of applications? The 80,400?
Mr. Chair, council members, no. So we would add that to the 2.75 million that we have reserved for that time. So it would increase that amount.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure. And then are we hearing from, of the 76, I think you said cities that participate, are we hearing any feedback as we're out and about or, asking them their input that, they're not applying because, in a list of reasons? Have we heard of any communities that have just kind of said, we're not going to apply?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, council members, I think that varies a lot by applicant. I personally haven't heard that with the tax-based revitalization account. I think, but the type of city that encounters kind of often these types of contaminants, it is widespread throughout the metro, but it tends to be the ones that had more industrial land that apply more frequently. So I think it really is very much related to what they find in terms of this particular category, and then when there's some momentum behind the redevelopment.
Okay.
But overall, I think that's a question that we hope to answer for you more thoroughly when we come back to the committee here later this year.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I would appreciate that because I'm always trying to figure out, are there barriers? Are there preconceived notions? We don't have enough staff? And then all the other reasons you might, we're not ready, or, the right partners haven't come together. So if there's some sort of information that you can bring that back, that would be great. And, again, this is my 5th year now on the council, and of course, being a city council member, and I'm just curious to see over time, where the money has been invested in throughout the region, you know, where it's going. And of course, the central core cities are going to, you know, to your point, have the issues because of industrial and prior to any kind of environmental standards and all that. So, but I just always like to know, in a moment in time, we see what we're seeing, but also over time, I'd like to just understand where the money is going or what barriers there might be to some of the other communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion, I have in queue Councilmembers Lee and then Bento. Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Related to the last question, Ms. Martin, when projects don't get funded, do we tell the cities or the developers, do we give them feedback about how they could do better next time? Because maybe their staff turnover and they're not used to jumping through our hoops, or it's a newer or growing developer who's not used to our process.
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, council members, yes, we do send a notice out to all the applicants with the recommendations. I invite them to call me and talk about those recommendations. In fact, we had some today earlier that I've spoke with, both in South St. Paul and in St. Paul. So there are often chances where people reapply. They get that feedback and they reapply. We saw some of those in the recommendations today. Some of these are repeat applicants that are successful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Bento.
This is kind of follows, thank you, Mr. Chair, kind of follows Committee Member Lee's question in a way. In reference to Serenity at 512 and 514 Humboldt, remember, I think it was a year ago that they got a grant and how grateful they were. They had reached out to me in advance to see what I could do to help, and I said, basically, I can't. It's up to getting the right score, and they got it, and they were thrilled. This isn't in my district, but I happen to know some people who are active on their board, and I also, in a previous career, used to visit people living at Humboldt, and if I were to get a question from them as to what can we do to raise our score, looking at this, I could convince them that the third and fourth bullet is something they could accomplish. I'm not sure the first and second bullet is something they could accomplish because it's a care setting for people with all sorts of health-related issues. And so the no projected tax base increase, I'm not sure how they're going to increase their tax base in a care setting. And low relative density, low potential for transit use. I would guess that there are some of the residents there who use Metro Mobility. I believe they also have a van that they use for some local kinds of things when Metro Mobility is not available, but I'm not sure what they could do to improve that. So are they kind of just out of this realm because of those two factors?
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, committee members, at times, yes.
Okay.
Overall, LCA awarded a $1.9 million grant to this project through the LCDA account. But in the case of this program, the objectives are slightly different, and so as you mentioned, that tax base does weigh heavily in the factoring, and given that most of the project is tax exempt. There are different levels of care there. And then some of those factors are really just based on the location of the project, the level of transit service, the density, depending on if they're, in a case like this one where they're reusing the existing buildings, a preservation rather than expanding. It just didn't fit as well with our criteria.
So will an organization like this know that this is probably not something they want to continue to apply for?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes. In this case, I have talked with both the managing staff at Serenity and in contact with the city. And, we're looking for if there will be other funds that would be more appropriate or more competitive for them.
Okay.
This one is unlikely to be.
Got it. Thank you. I'm sure those are hard messages, Mr. Chair, I apologize. I'm sure those are hard messages to deliver because we want to reach out and be supportive, but I appreciate that, Marcus, and I love when you bring these recommendations to us. It's always interesting to see what's happening where, so thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Did I hear you say that modifications to TBRA may be coming as part of the broader LCA discussion or changes in 2023? Potential changes?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, no, I haven't yet started thinking about changes for next year. Really still, given that there is one more funding cycle, I really focus more on this year, but I think that's possible as, you know, of course, the discussions continue here with this committee, and as we hear more feedback throughout the year, that it's possible that we would recommend some changes. But at this point, no.
Okay.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Were there any, thanks, Mr. Chair, were there any significant changes? And I think I know the answer to this, from last year to this year. And then a follow-up to that is, just off the top of your head, what sort of recommendations are you thinking about, if you're thinking about any, for moving forward to this particular program?
Mr. Martin.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the question. I think in terms of this program, we would like to be sure that the access is what you expect it to be. So that is somewhat of a broad statement, but that can be in terms of what changes we made before. We have kind of refined the seed category so that more projects can apply. That was a case where before we really were looking at it more from a very early stage development, and now we've widened that eligibility to sites that either have a good concept or have a development project. So we've kind of made that a bigger focus as an example of trying to improve that accessibility to the grant programs. That's something that, you know, we have had, I think, a good balance, geographic balance over time. I hope that comes through when more information is presented on that. We have a target of at least 25% of the funding going to suburban locations in each cycle, and I think in most times when we receive the applications, we are able to do that. So those are the kinds of changes that I would anticipate kind of focusing on, but we're open to suggestions if you have one in mind.
Thank you. Further discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Martin has recommended that the Metropolitan Council award 12 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $2,369,600 as shown in Table 1 in the business item, and to authorize the Executive Director of Community Development to execute the grant agreements on behalf of the council. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. 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 Opposed? That carries. Mr. Martin, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the report and for your work on this. And committee members, I'll remind us that we need to adjourn by 5:45 tonight. Next is, oh, thanks. The next item is item number 2023-139, the City of Independence 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Director Barajas informs that we have 6 more comprehensive plans to approve remaining, so we're getting there, light at the end of the tunnel. And today to present on City of Independence 2040 Comprehensive Plan is Freya Thamman. Welcome.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Freya Thamman, and I'm the sector representative for District 1. And today I will be presenting the City of Independence's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Although the city staff is unable to be here today, I did want to thank Mark Cultus for his time and coordination on this plan. Mark is the city administrator, and he's also the city planner for Independence, and just wanted to appreciate the work that he's done. There's development waiting in the wings for Independence, so the city is happy to be at this point in the planning process. Independence is a city of approximately 3,800 people on the western edge of Hennepin County. Independence is surrounded by the communities of Greenfield to the north, Medina and Orono to the east, and Minnetrista to the south. Delano and Franklin Township are to the west in Wright County. As shown here, Independence surrounds the city of Maple Plain on 3 sides. Thrive MSP 2040 designates Independence in 3 different community designations. The majority of the city is in the agricultural community designation, and the agricultural area is generally the western 2/3 of the city. The eastern third of the city is in the diversified rural community designation, and then there's a small part of the city adjacent to Maple Plain to the north that's in the emerging suburban edge community designation, and that area is shown in light yellow here. This slide shows the regional systems in Independence. The city is fortunate to have several regional park system components, which include Lake Rebecca and Lake Sarah Regional Park Reserves, as well as Baker Carver Regional Trail and the Lake Sarah Regional Trail Search Corridor. As shown here, Highway 12 generally runs east-west through the community, and then parts of eastern Independence are served with regional wastewater services. Between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 460 people, representing 300 households, and will have an increase of 90 jobs. The plan included a slight adjustment to the city's regionally sewered households, which changes the city's affordable housing need allocation to 54 units, as detailed in the staff report. This table shows the planned residential density in the emerging suburban edge area of the city. The last line, I'll note, has an accidental duplicate, and it should show 11 units on 18.4 acres, which is consistent with what's in the staff report. The emerging suburban edge areas are expected to plan for densities of at least 3 units an acre for newly sewered residential development. And as shown in Table 3 of the staff report, the city is consistent with this policy and has a planned residential density of 3 to 3.5 units per acre. The plan is also consistent with land use policies for the diversified rural and agricultural areas of the city. This slide shows the existing land uses in Independence. About 70% of Independence is agricultural, rural, or undeveloped, the lighter green colors on the slide. And then there's some low-density, single-family residential shown in yellow. The city has an abundance of high-quality natural resources, and about 15% of the city is parks or lakes and water bodies. Lake Independence and Lake Sarah are both in the eastern part of the city. The city's vision includes retaining its rural character and preserving its agricultural lands and preserving its natural environments. The city of Maple Plain is shown in gray on the figure here, and it acts as a local downtown for many residents in Independence. This is the city's future land use map. In general, the western 2/3 of Independence is guided agricultural, 1 unit per 40 acres, and the eastern third is guided rural residential, 1 unit per 5 acres, which is reflective of previously authorized comprehensive plans. The city has a significant amount of land in the agricultural preserves program, and these areas are shown in dark green on the map. The plan indicates that the agricultural and rural areas together would have an overall density of 1 unit per 10 acres through 2040. The city's 2040 plan is very similar to its previously authorized plans. The 2040 plan differs from the previous plans in that it has sewered residential both north and south of Maple Plain with this plan. And it also includes a new area that's guided Lakeshore Estates, which is south of Lake Independence. These areas would change the city's community designation to emerging suburban edge as shown in Figure 3 of the staff report. As discussed in the staff report, staff review of the city's 2040 plan found that the plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. The proposed actions before you today are to authorize the City of Independence to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's Seward household forecasts as shown in Table 2 of the review record, to revise the city's affordable housing need allocation for 2021 through 2030 to 54 units, to revise the community designation map to show emerging suburban edge residential land uses near Maple Plain, as shown in Figure 3 of the attached review record, to advise the city that it needs to provide the date that the Pioneer Sarah Creek Watershed Management Commission approved the local water management plan, and finally to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts, land use, housing, and water supply, and that all supplemental information provided during the review process for completeness needs to be included in the city's final plan submittal, and that the final plan must be determined consistent with the information provided during the review process prior to council review of any future comprehensive plan amendments. This plan is scheduled for the Environment Committee on June 27th, and then is on the schedule for the July 12th Metropolitan Council meeting. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Thamman, for your report and for your work on this plan. Discussion on the plan? Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I want to echo what Freya said. Mark, with the city, wears two hats, and there's a lot of lift in this, and there is a proposed development that had a lot of interest in this since, well into last year and before that. And so there were a lot of moving parts, and I'm just really proud of the City of Independence for getting it to this point, and it'll continue to move through the process. And I really have to just share the fact that the developer and the city just sang Freya's praises, because she's very easy to work with, and she shows up and really meets people where they're at and is always offering her expertise and assistance. And that's exactly what we want to be known for at the Met Council, because we're here to help our communities. So hats off to you, Freya, and your team for the great work that you've done on this to help get it here today. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Councilmember Johnson, and thanks for your work, Freya, on this. Was that a motion to approve?
Yeah, I'd be happy to move to recommend approval through the process, whatever the motion stated earlier. I just
There's
lost
a
my
series
screen.
of actions.
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Councilmember Johnson has moved the series of actions to approve the City of Independence 2040 Comprehensive Plan and put that into effect. Is there a second?
Second.
It was Councilmember Wolf or Councilmember Bento, and stereo second. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thanks again, Ms. Hammond. Next on the non-consent business agenda is item 2023-116. It's the annual Metropolitan Regional Parks operation and maintenance allocation. And I hope I'm going to say this right. We have Aimee Junget here to present. All right, thank you. Ms. Junget, welcome.
All right, good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Aimee Junget. I am a budget analyst for community development. And this afternoon, I'm presenting the annual funding allocation for Metropolitan Regional Parks Operations and Maintenance, known for short as O&M. So first off, what is operations and maintenance? So Minnesota Statute 473351 requires that by July 15th of each year, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reports to the council the funding requests from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous year. The state legislature funds a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional park system because the system draws a significant percentage of its visits from outside the metropolitan area and around the state of Minnesota. The law requires the council to review the operating expenses of each agency for eligibility, and we do this on an annual basis. So state statute provides the formula distribution for O&M. The formula is based on 3 different inputs. 40% is based on the previous year's operating and maintenance expenditures. 40% is based on the previous year's proportionate share of total system visits, and then 20% is based on the previous year's proportionate share of total acreage by each agency. So the analysis this year programmed $17.49 million appropriated from the legislature for state fiscal year 2024. This includes $8.54 million from the state general fund and $8.95 million for the lottery in lieu of sales tax revenue. One important note here is that these appropriations are the result of a successful 2023 legislative session outcome for Parks O&M, with a one-time general fund increase of $6 million for state fiscal year 2024, and an increase to the lottery and lieu portion of an additional $1.5 million. So if you look at the table above, you can see on the left the expenses reported by each agency totaling over $129 million, and then on the right are the shares for each agency totaling the $17.49 million appropriated by the state. And then lastly, the inputs for these shares are final. So just to quickly recap the funding for this coming state fiscal year, we have $8.54 million from state general fund and an estimated $8.95 million of the lottery in lieu of sales tax revenue. So these final pass-through amounts will be based on the actual revenues received. And then we arrive at our requested action that the Metropolitan Council accept the Regional Park System State Fiscal Year 2024 operations and maintenance requests. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Junget. Questions on that report? Councilmember Wolf, you look like you're going to. Councilmember Wolf.
I don't have a question, just a comment. This year is better, but it's still nowhere where it is supposed to be, because it's supposed to be 40%. And we're up to like over 13, which is better than 9 where we were, but it's still a long way to go to get to 40.
Right. And I appreciate your bringing that observation up every cycle because, right, it's a commitment, right? Further discussion. Councilmember Johnson, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, that was going to be my comment too, but I did have a, so there was the one-time appropriation of $6 million, and then there was an increase in the lottery distribution. Is that one time or is that ongoing?
Mr. Chair, council member. So this year, the increase in the account did result in a $1.5 million increase, but there were additional statutory changes that should create an ongoing increase for O&M for lottery and lieu. So it's a bit complex, but we saw an increase this year and we would expect to see one in future years.
Okay.
For the lottery and lieu portion.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
Well, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Bento.
I was just going to note that the formula includes a factor regarding proportionate share of total systems visits. Total systems visits during the pandemic were significant, huge, which impacted the need for more O&M. So our parks and trails are chasing their tails to keep up. And I want to commend the staff for their work on this, including our finance staff and Hannah and Judd and all of the folks involved in, Emmett, all of the folks involved in the lobbying efforts, including the agencies. But there's a lot of work yet to do, and Councilmember Wolf's point was really well made.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further discussion? Hearing none, the recommended action is that the Metropolitan Council accept the Regional Parks System State Fiscal Year 2024 Operations and Maintenance Funding Requests. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you. And our final non-consent business item for tonight is item 2023-140. It's to amend the budget for the Nicket Lake LCA pre-development grant. And we have Nicole Clapp here to present. Welcome, Ms. Clapp.
Hello. Chair Lilligren, council members, thank you for making As Chair Lilburn said, my name is Nicole Clapp. I'm the Acting Grants Manager for the CD MTS Finance and Administration Department. So the action up for consideration for you tonight is that the Community Development Committee approve amending the Nick at Lake LCA pre-development grant budget, as we will go over. And I'm sorry, my pronouns are she, her. Okay, so the Nick at Lake grant provided funds for pre-development work related to 10 acres of land the city of Minneapolis owns on West Lake Street. This is often referred to as the former Kmart site. The site will include a section of street reconnecting Nicollet Avenue and will include high-density, mixed-use, and walkable redevelopments. So the request of the grantee was received on March 20th from the city of Minneapolis to amend the budget of 2 line items, which is attachment A of your business item. The community engagement work will be completed by Public Works, paid for with funds already in their budget, and the council grant funds will pay for the site planning work completed by the city of Minneapolis Community Planning and Economic Development Department. So the CDC must approve all budget shifts that are greater than 20% of the total award. This particular request represents a 50% shift in the budget. So the request is considered a simple budget shift because the city has confirmed the project is unchanged, the eligible activities are still being completed, and the city will achieve and report on all the deliverables in the grant agreement. The proposed amendment does not change the project from what was described in the initial application. So the pre-development activities, just breaking down the budgetary shift a bit more. The council awarded $150,000 for this grant project. The original application requested the funds be split between 2 activities that are both eligible for the LCA pre-development grant program. These included design workshops and community engagement, and development of site plans, staging plans, and public realm plans. So the grant will still deliver 2 to 3 cross-sections or layout alternatives for the new Nicollet Street layout design and documentation of community engagement activities, and 2 to 3 public space network plan design alternatives. So as you can see on the slide, they are just changing the budget for the design workshops and community engagement to have 0 funds associated with it and shifting that $75,000 into the staging plan and site plan, but still delivering on all of those elements of the original award. So with that, the proposed action is that this committee move to make the proposed action, that the amend the Nick at Lake LCA pre-development grant award project summary to adjust budget activity line items as detailed in attachment B of this report. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Clapp, for the report and for your work on this. This is a project that's very near and dear to my heart and was actually very near and dear to my home. And during my time on the Minneapolis City Council, we got put some of the planning framework pieces in place that have got us here. So a lot of people have worked very hard on this, including our staff, so much appreciated. It's kind of a unique project. And I hear from my friends in the city of Minneapolis that the collaboration between the CPED, the Community Planning, Economic Development, and Public Works is really at a high point on this project, and that doesn't always happen within large organizations. So good news all around. Discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're all eager for this site to be redeveloped. And this amendment is something only an accountant could love. In the interest of moving things forward, I would move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
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 Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much. Yep, thank you. And with that, we will move on to the information section of our agenda. It looks like we're making good time. So the first information item is the 2024 preliminary community development operating budget. And Heather Geisel is here to present. Welcome.
Well, hello. I need to plug in. I don't know.
Oh, Greg, is there a way to plug in a laptop so it can be presented? I'm sure he's monitoring and he'll be out.
I think so, he must be.
Plug in now.
Thanks, Lisa. Yay.
The man from behind the curtain.
Are you sure?
The normal.
There we go.
We saw the baby.
We saw the baby.
Yeah.
Hi,
Ms.
Mr. Chair,
Geisel,
committee
welcome.
members. I'm Heather Geisel. I am the Director of Finance and Administration for Community Development. I'm here today to present the 2024 preliminary operating budget. We do this annually. This slide deck may look familiar to you. I have plagiarized quite a bit from my predecessor, so just want to preface that by saying if there's anything that you'd like to see differently next year, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We can always modify the formatting or what we cover in the presentation. So for today, we will start out with a little bit of background on how the budget is created, high-level economic conditions, discuss a little bit about the advancing of how we're advancing Thrive MSP 2040 through this work, and then discuss the 2024 sources and uses. So that's an opportunity to see the charts of the incoming revenue and how that will be used, and then a little bit of information on some upcoming targeted conversations that we'll be having later on this year. So I believe you've seen this slide before, so this is just a high-level look at the budget development schedule for 2024. So we're in quarter 2 right now, discussing past performance and the connection to Thrive MSP 2040. We'll come back next quarter and talk to you about the capital program, give you some more operating updates, and then start with some targeted topics that we'll discuss in a little bit more detail further on in the slides. So our budget is really about supporting the implementation of Thrive MSP 2040. Specifically in CD, that includes building the housing policy plan and the regional parks policy plan. It's also about financial stewardship. So we are looking at today the annual budget and then a multi-year budget to ensure we're structured over time. We want to make sure that we have construct balanced budgets, are prioritizing structural solutions to mitigate structural gaps over time, and maintaining reserve balances to at council policy levels. So when building the budget, these are the things that we use to inform how we build it when we're meeting with the different program units. So discussing the council's regional role, data analysis and research, what the equity impacts are of the work that we're doing, the general economic conditions, what funds we could leverage, timely financial impacts, and then supporting council initiatives that are laid out by all of you. So looking ahead, the preliminary budget was landed at the end of April. There is still work to do in these conversations up until we have the public comment draft, which is due, I believe, September 6th. So we'll be incorporating, we'll be doing some financial forecasting into 2025, looking at the legislative outcomes, so incorporating items from the legislative session, particularly parks, keeping an eye on federal budgets with the impact that those have to HRA, and then continuing to have discussions about council initiatives, and then how the division work plans fit into the budget as well. So I'll do a high-level overview of sort of a regional snapshot of the general economic conditions. We use this as part of our budget framing. These are provided by our research department, so if there is anything within these slides for which you'd want additional details, I do have a sources slide in here, but research could also provide you additional information, or I could get in touch with research and help you get in touch with the right people. The Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area continues to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic repercussions. Employment and economic activity that were lost during the pandemic response of 2020 have mostly been regained. The annual gross domestic product for Minnesota was estimated at $447 billion in 2022. This amounts to an annual growth of 8.3% or 1.2% in real inflation-adjusted terms. Minnesota's gross state product rebound has been slower than the national average. Economic expansion for the Minneapolis-St. Paul region is not yet published, but will be similar to the state growth rate.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
can I just
Councilmember
ask on that
Johnson.
first point? I know that's the big number that we've mostly recovered from pandemic as far as jobs and economic activity, but is there disaggregated data that goes with that to show, well, who has almost recovered or who has lost, right? We know that there are a lot of gaps that were exacerbated. So just at some point, not for now, but to just, we do the big numbers and we should, but there's a lot of data behind that might show some things that are interesting as far as our work. And I'm sure the staff knows that, but it's top of mind for me, so.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, committee members, we'll note that. I don't know, Lisa, if you have anything to add right now, or if you want to, we can come back to it.
Director Ross?
Council members, we can follow up with the information that we have, which I believe is largely available on our website, but I will connect with our research manager on that.
Thank you. Thanks. Ms. Geisel?
Okay, so Minneapolis and St. Paul metropolitan area is enjoying a historic building boom. The built space investment and development have been a bright spot despite building cost inflation. In 2022, built space investment in the metro area amounted to $6 billion of newly permitted housing and $3 billion of commercial, industrial, and other non-residential projects. New housing production is expected to exceed 22,000 units for 2022. It's a lot of 22s right there. Meeting or exceeding unit levels in 2019 to 2021. Housing production levels are highest in a century, steadily reducing the area's housing deficit and providing more choice and flattening of rent inflation for apartment seekers. Job opening rates are at record levels. Job openings rates are at record levels. Unemployment rates remain low compared to other metro areas. So unemployment rates fell steadily from 11.9% at the peak of the pandemic in May of 2020 to about 4.8% in December of 2020 and have remained around 2.5% since December 2021. So we were at 2.5% again at the end of December 2022. So Minneapolis, St. Paul's 2.7% unemployment rate in December of 2022 was the sixth lowest among the nation's 25 largest metropolitan areas, and job openings rates in Minnesota have been at record levels, 6 to 8% of all jobs being open in every month since September of 2021.
And just briefly,
Councilmember Johnson,
for me, thank you. And how's our labor participation rate? We know usually I think we were in the high 70s. I don't know. That's just always something I'm looking at too as it relates to unemployment. I don't need it now, but that's just one of those things in a past job I had that, the two numbers were often looked at together. So just curious.
Yep, we'll follow up on that one.
Councilmember Carter?
Thank you. It's continuing good news. I really appreciate hearing. The unemployment number is staying low at this point. Do we have disaggregated data for our populations across the metro area as well?
Yes.
Chair, council members, I see Lisa nodding over there. So yes, we can, I'm sure, provide that information once we connect with research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, that was Also, thank you for
Right.
that, because it was getting to that first, how do we know that everybody's recovering at the same rate? Because we know they're not. Thank you.
Ms. Geisel.
So this slide lists the data and sources. Like I said, research was able to provide me with the majority of the information and can provide additional resources or information if you want them, and we'll also follow up on the items that have been brought up during the presentation. So now we're going to transition into talking about Thrive MSP 2040 and how we support that work, and then also look at the results of the investments that have been made over the last 12 to 18 months. So one of the big initiatives that we continue to take on is to build the 2050 Regional Development Guide. All of the items here serve as a foundation for the 2050 regional planning process. So far we have, Did it go to sleep?
Well, we're hooking
Greg,
back up.
yeah, Greg, oh, there we go. Good job.
Grab the mouse, it fell asleep.
Okay. Well, let's go. Councilmember Carter.
You know, I was going to take advantage of a break, but as long as we're there anyway, I meant also to ask, as in relationship to the job opening numbers, about job growth numbers. I know we track those as well, and I'd love to hear the comparison of where we are in number of jobs since, and how that stacks up against the job, since pandemic that is, and how that stacks up against the openings and availability.
Sure, Chair, committee members will follow up on that one too.
Thanks, I
Yep.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the 2050 Regional Development Guide, we've completed the 2050 regional forecasts. We've also completed the preliminary community designations. You can see on the image on the left-hand side of the slide here. And then the council has endorsed working 2050 Development Guide vision and values earlier this year, I believe at the beginning of February. So targeted topics, the 2050 Regional Development Guide, so guiding and directing the region's growth, land use planning and policy, regional parks and trails, system planning policies, the housing policy, research and analysis, public engagement, and then some cross-divisional integration and collaborative projects. So the 2024 initiatives related to the Regional Development Guide will include continued work on the vision, values, and shared regional goals, as well as forecasting, land use policy, the parks policy plan, and housing policy plan. The next item is to advance the Thrive initiative of equity. So within the last year, we've been investing in the region and in our staff. One of these is awarding $2 million to 9 communities through the launch of the new affordable home ownership pilot grants through the local housing incentive accounts, or LHIA. We also launched the HUD Community Choice Demonstration Program in September of 2022. Continue to expand housing choice and capacity in Metro HRA, enhanced equity and engagement requirements in regional parks, and then enhanced community engagement in regional planning processes. And then we continue to promote equity across the region in our day-to-day work. So that's across the region and in supporting and developing staff here at the council. Continuing to center racial equity and environmental justice in our work, creating choice, real choice in where we live and recreate, investing in affordable housing, master plans for regional parks and trails must include an equity analysis, competitive grant programs. So we have a number of competitive grant programs in community development. So that's, you'll see the 2024, later this year, the 2024 equity grant program. Information and criteria will be shared, and that program will be solicited next year, and then continuing to factor equity into our investments and by sharing the scoring criteria with you for the parks programs and the livable communities programs. We've also At a staff level, continuing to update and revisit the division racial equity action plan. So we actually just had a discussion on this morning in our leadership team meeting. So we'll be bringing some new, bringing the racial equity action plan to our individual units and assigning goals for our individual departments or units to be working on that again. So. And then continuing to have regular conversations to raise up equity efforts, grow staff capacity, and better institutionalize equity through trainings and other initiatives. So now we will pivot to livable communities. So talking a little bit about the recent initiatives that Livable Communities has taken on over the last 12 to 18 months. So they're continuing to promote prosperity, equity, and livability. As I mentioned on an earlier slide, they've launched the new affordable homeownership pilot grants. So that was $2 million to 9 communities. They have a new policy development grant program which supports communities' readiness for development. 94,000 went to 2 different communities. Continuing to have conversations about improving access to grant programs through direct outreach, plain language, and program modifications, and then community engagement to inform the 2050 housing policy plan. And just as a highlight, there is $27.5 million available in 2023 for the LCA programs, $5.5 million in TBRA, $16.6 million in livable communities, and $5.4 million in the local housing incentives account. You may remember last October I brought like a look back on so it was 2021 look back at 22 on the grant programs and the impact that those had in the region, and the plan is to do something similar again this year, looking back at 2022. So more to come on what the impact was for these programs, but this is just a quick highlight. So for 2024 initiatives, for livable communities, continuing work on the 2050 housing policy plan. They will continue to contextualize and be reflective of the resident experience being more accountable and actionable, and then analyzing LCA grant programs to evaluate the impact toward regional development goals, setting up new systems to better align and allow for tying application evaluation criteria to post-award performance, and then continuing to reduce barriers to access funds and improve program goals. Switching gears again to local planning assistance. So local planning assistance ensures coordinated, orderly, and efficient development in the region. They too will be working on the 2050 Regional Development Guide, developing tools and programs to support local governments. They had a spring swing earlier this year, which was sector reps visited face-to-face with nearly 30 communities in spring 2023, with more to come. So continuing endorsements of working 2050 regional vision and values, analysis to support development of growth management policies for equitable land use policies, density and existing conditions, and then continuing to work with metro cities to support regional planning. The 2024 initiatives for local planning assistance include supporting local governments in implementation of their 2040 comprehensive plans, improvements to the comprehensive plan review process, and then 2050 regional policy, including climate and environment, economic competitiveness, and rural and ag policies, and then continuing to look for ways to amplify voices in disadvantaged communities. For Metro HRA, recent initiatives, so promoting equity, livability, and prosperity. They've collaborated with home partners on a Homework Starts with Home expansion as an investment in place strategy. They're moving people from the street to housing stability using 218 new emergency housing vouchers. And they are doing more to learn about how to better meet the needs of voucher holders through residential preferences study. 2024 initiatives, exploring wealth building with participants, the Minnesota State Rental Assistance Program, foster youth to independence program, and then the residential preference of housing choice voucher holders. Just to expand on a little bit of that, so exploring wealth building with participants is pathways to home ownership via housing choice voucher home ownership or other community sources. They're doing some exploration of HUD's family self-sufficiency program and resource sharing and tenant focus groups. The Minnesota State Rental Assistance Program is $46 million for the 2024-2025 biennium. It's funded through Minnesota Housing and modeled after the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So lots of interesting work happening in HRA as well. Recent initiatives in regional parks, the Regional Development Guide and Parks Policy Plan work, the Regional Park System, Geographic Information System improvements work. They are working to complete phase 2. The park's core planning work, review of long-range plans, comp plans, environmental documents, and enhanced coordination and collaboration with regional park agencies, especially during the 2023 legislative session. Just some highlights here. They are actively working on the Regional Development Guide, taking the high-level council vision and values and stepping it down to the parks policy area. Phase 2 of the Regional Park System, Geographic Information System, improvement project is reaching a culmination in the coming months. This collaborative project with our 10 regional park implementing partners creates more accurate data that can be used for internal council processes and better external wayfinding tools for parks and trails visitors. And then just noting the successful 2023 legislative session. For initiatives in 2024, again, the Regional Development Guide, including engaging with non-park and trail visitors, completing and sharing the Regional Parks Historical Cultural Study. So that is being used to better understand the inequities of our past and present so that we can create a more inclusive parks and trail system moving forward. And then finally, in 2024, they'll launch the 3rd round of the Parks Equity Grant Program to help make regional parks and trails a place where all feel they are welcomed and they belong. So for research, recent initiatives, advancing a better Twin Cities region for all by delivering trusted, useful information. They completed an analysis and dissemination of the Parks Visitor Study in partnership with the Parks Unit. They also developed and released the Growing Shade tool in partnership with LPA. Completed and released population estimates, conducted joint research projects, and then released the greenhouse gas scenario planning tool. 2024 initiatives, releasing regional and local forecasts of population and employment. These are key inputs in the 2050 Regional Development Guide. The regional planning technical support, including scenario planning, regionally significant ecological areas, young leaders, collaboration, community designations, environmental justice framework, and among others. So at a high level, planning for 2050, these are our big initiatives. So the 2050 Regional Development Guide, as we've touched on a number of different times, including the implementation of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant from the EPA and implementation of new legislative planning requirements, the Climate Action Plan work, implementation and reporting, continuing our federally funded HRA work, the 2024 Equity Grant Program, and 5 new FTEs who will be supporting this work as well. So here we get to the nuts and bolts of it with the numbers. So preliminary budget it was $162.3 million compared to $156 million adopted in 2023. That's up 0.4% from the adopted budget last year. The comparison does not include changes from the 2023 carry forward amendment or the upcoming Q2 amendment that goes before Council on June 28th. The carry forward amendment included 1.5 million in additional project funding, and then the quarter two amendment also increases the park's O&M pass-through funding by 6.75 million as a result of the 2023 legislative session, the additional funding that was received. Let's see, so overall, the preliminary budget is up about 6.3 million from the 2023 adopted budget. HRA pass-through increased mostly due to higher per unit costs from rising rent and utility expenses, federal housing choice voucher program. Federal budget authority for 2023 was up 7% from 2022. And the preliminary budget does not include the new statewide rental assistance program created by the 2023 state legislature. So we are still waiting to hear on the number of vouchers that will be awarded to the Metro HRA and the accompanying administrative fees. So the HRA pass-through budget may be impacted during the public comment to reflect the statewide rental assistance program and any emerging trends in PUC and voucher utilization. So potential changes for the public comment. In development, the Metro HRA pass-through, statewide rental assistance program, the livable communities pass-through, and then specific projects like the 2050 development guide and the climate action plan implementation. Next steps will be just wrapping up from the state legislative session, any new funding, project refinement, stakeholder conversations, and adjustments to the 2024 budget. As you can see here, revenue sources total $162.3 million. 95.3% of that is HUD pass-through funds for HAP and admin fees of $7.9 million. Property tax in the amount of $40.1 million, which is used for CD and HRA, LCA, and Parks debt service. And then reserves are at $11.6 million. Previous year LCA property tax levies and Parks debt service anticipatory levies at $1.9 million have been added to the fund balance. And the Parks pass-through is at $11.5 million, and the Housing Trust Fund is at $318,000. $2.8 million in FAHP rental income, and then the other is HRA portability and admin fee, which is a transfer from Metro Transit for the HAT outreach coordinator time, other HRA revenue, and some Parks interest earnings. Expenses by program, you can see here, HRA taking the bulk of the budget, and then livable communities, Parks, other being broken out into research, division management, and local planning assistance. And then finally, the uses by category, the largest category being pass-through, followed by salaries and benefits as well. So FAP maintenance, which is $1 million, is a combination of budgets. Contracted services detail includes $3.68 million for a multitude of different projects, including regional development guide work, climate action plan, software, different studies and inventory and staff trainings, and other policy planning, equity framework, development guide work, and then some Parks ambassador programs, and just some smaller programs that make up the bulk of that work. So a couple of different targeted topics that we'll come back to talk to you about in July: the LCA grant programs, how we expand and preserve affordable housing, supporting efficient growth of housing, jobs and services, develop high-density mixed-use projects near transit, and clean polluted land for redevelopment with public benefits. So you'll see that on an upcoming agenda here in July. And then in the fall, we'll come back to talk about Metro HRA, connecting people to stable housing with discussions on the small area market rent analysis, a public housing agency plan, property disposition and purpose, and rent standards and utility limits. And with that, I can stand for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Geisel. Just one question. Will this slide presentation will be linked from the agenda?
Yeah.
Is that, okay. Yeah, Director Bras.
Just as a reminder, and for our new council members as well, we don't post our budget presentations ahead of the meeting because we want you to see it for the first time as we're walking through it, and we will post it after the meeting.
Thank you. Discussion on that report, or we're going to see this again and again as we put together the 2024 budget. So, yeah, Councilmember Carter.
As we have next steps in developing the budget, and we always do, of course, before we vote, I would assume on the budget. But this year is pretty special because of the many changes that we've seen. Will there be a schedule that council members will be able to get in advance of those community meetings and presentations that will be sharing the budget and discussing with community members?
Yeah.
Easily.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm going to call, Nick, do you know if there's any schedule or anything?
Schedule for?
Yeah, I mean, we have the budget development schedule. I don't know if it gets down to the level of having like where we would have the individual conversations. It's more or less at a high level of when we're going to be visiting the management committee and the full council, but I'm not aware of any more granular schedule. But yeah.
Councilmember Carter.
Okay, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So just looking back at that schedule, I think it was the first slide or so in your presentation. When we get it online, we'll see that. And I know that there will be opportunity then, request, and even council member requests to schedule meetings of that sort. Within my particular district, because of course I am new, would like very much to lean in, and I don't know if other council members may be doing that as well, newer members in particular, and those who have standard practices of doing so. But may I request then, particularly for District 14, and suggest that others may want as well, that we be notified of those meeting requests that come out of our district, and as you put a schedule together of the general schedule as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things. As far as timing goes, I'm just trying to, I think that's a great question. I just don't know if we take this out and do community meetings with our individual cities for our budget. We have a lot of community engagement with them on the programs once we've adopted the budget and then start working on the plan. So that might be a clarifying point for you, that those meetings will come when we kind of get into it and they'll be contacting you too. So that's just from my understanding being here for a little bit on the council. The other thing, I appreciate wanting to unveil the budget to the council in real time. I would just say I would prefer to have it posted in advance because I like to pre-read presentations in advance. I've made the same request at the management committee. It's kind of difficult when you're getting it all at once and you can't maybe set up some of your questions in your head in advance if they aren't answered during the presentation. So I want to also say great work on this. I appreciate it. It was very thorough. And last but not least, and I'll look to Director Barajas on this too. How are you doing with fulfilling empty positions in community development? I know you've got new positions that are coming online, probably with some readjustments with staff leaving and coming and going. And how are you doing, just currently in this budget as far as, getting those positions filled so that we can, it's a lift, right? And we need the full team to do it, and we're in a really tough job market as far as attracting. So just something I think about as we review the budgets too, like, oh, this is great, but then we got to make sure you have the resources to do the work. So that's always on my mind.
Director Barajas,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. Chair, council members. We are nearly at full staff complement. We obviously are We are hiring positions that you included in our budget for this year. So those are underway and nearing completion, and with some staff changes too. So we're backfilling from some promotions, so moving folks into positions and backfilling some of those. But otherwise, we're not, while we'd love to have everybody on staff right away, we know it takes some time, but we're, I think, otherwise in a pretty healthy position. Some of our recently posted positions have had incredible response, probably overwhelming is what some of my managers might term it as, and the number of applications that they're still reviewing, over 100 applications for a single position in some cases. So certainly the job market has been tight and is competitive, especially I think for our sort of middle experience, mid-career type positions. That's where it seems to be most competitive, and our entry-level positions and some of our newer career positions, we have folks, that's where we seem to have a lot of applications. So I think we're moving into a better position as an employer as far as being able to have a larger and more competitive application pool. Hopefully that sticks up. So we're, and of course, we're always considering, especially with some new legislative directives, some new potential new programs like Heather had mentioned around a state financial rent assistance program. Those are some conversations that we'll be bringing to you in the future once those details kind of get worked out on what it looks like, about how that might impact our budget, and of course any staffing that we would need to accompany new program work. We're already kind of programmed to the max with our existing staff, so new program work always requires us to relook at what's actually possible and what it would take to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll call on you in just a second, Councilmember Wolf, but I will note, I feel like we've had this conversation about when we get these reports in this committee before, and I don't know if we can somehow sequence it so we get them sometime before this, or at least we have them in front of us here, because, excuse me, it's a lot of numbers and things, and so it's kind of difficult to just follow along. So maybe we can rethink that, and I think I made that commitment to this committee last year, so my apologies for not encouraging a different approach this time.
And Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'm working on the same thing in management.
Sure.
Which
right
you
here.
serve on, so,
Right.
sometimes we get them in advance and sometimes we don't.
Right. I mean, I appreciate the,
Yeah.
the interest in having us see the information before it goes out publicly, but yeah. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to pile on and say I like the information ahead of time also. It's hard to take it in properly.
Right.
I mean, I'm a very visual learner, and talking eventually goes wah, 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 wah. So I miss when I don't have the stuff written down. And to that point, the staff report that goes with this is, 2 paragraphs. It doesn't say
brief.
anything.
Right.
Those reports should have the details that aren't on the slides, because otherwise we have no way, unless we have a perfect memory, to know what's going on with the budget. Because I like to go back sometimes and look at old agenda items and make sure I was catching what was going on, and you can't do that with that sort of a staff report.
Agree. So we'll give some thought to a better way to present it, to make it work. It's great work, Ms. Geisel, and to your team too. Thanks very much. I mean, this is great work. And it's kind of the meat and potatoes of what we do here, right? So the budget, so. Cool, thank you. Any more discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none, we have 15 minutes before we have to adjourn. We have 2 more information items before, so should I just go down the agenda and we'll see where we get, or? What's that? Okay, so we will move on to our second information item. It's the 2022 plant monitoring report. And Katelyn Champoux is here to present. Welcome, Ms. Champoux. It feels like it's been a while since we've seen you.
A couple weeks, a couple months. I can't remember the last time me and Ryan were up here. But hello, it's nice to see you all again. Try to be speedy today. But yes, so good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I'm Katelyn Champoux. I'm a planner and local planning assistant, and I'm here today to present on the 2022 Plat Monitoring Program report. There we go. So I want to start by first giving a big picture of how our data and policy relate to one another. So at the heart of long-range planning are comprehensive plans that set the stage by guiding future land uses to accommodate population growth. And communities update their local comprehensive plans during the larger decennial update process and through amendments for smaller interim changes. And then in addition to guiding future land uses, comp plans describe existing land use which within a community, which helps us to understand the region's current land use inventory. This data is complemented by both the Agricultural Preserves Program and the Plat Monitoring Program. So the Agricultural Preserves Program, which you may hear about in a future meeting from my colleague Tim Anderson, identifies areas that are protected from development, whereas the Plat Monitoring Program that I'm presenting on today tries to capture land that will develop in the near future at that point right before issuing building permits. So the Plat Monitoring Program was established in 2001 with input from the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities, which is now known as Metro Cities, and the Builders Association of the Twin Cities, which is now known as Housing First Minnesota. And the program began with 12 volunteer communities that reported data on their 2000 plats, the year 2000 plats. And since then, it has grown to 45 participants. So local governments have joined the program for a variety of reasons, but for the most part, it's usually been a condition for authorizing a comprehensive plan update or an amendment. And the purpose of this program is to monitor sewered residential development on the developing edge of the region by collecting information on the number of housing units and acres platted, the mix of single-family and multifamily units, land consumption, and average residential density. So this program gives the council the ability to assess available land supply in the participating communities and to monitor density of new development for comparison with the council's density policy of 3 units per net developable acre in these mostly developing edge communities. And participating communities are asked annually to submit information about their approved residential plats from the previous year, along with a copy of the plat. And then based on this information, the net acreage of development is calculated by taking out that undevelopable land, and then we use that to measure the net residential density. So then the results of this program aren't just used for plat monitoring, but communities can also receive credit for their higher density plats. So then that gives them a little bit of flexibility when responding to the market and platting lower density residential developments. So that's why you may hear this program referred to as a credit program. So then on this map, it shows the 45 communities that currently participate in the plat monitoring program. Those are shown in blue, and then the 12 volunteer communities are shown by the gray hatch marks. Might be a little tricky to see on the screen. But communities from 6 of the 7 counties in the region have communities that participate in the program. The only county that is not represented in the program is Ramsey County. That's likely because most of the communities are built out or nearly built out. They are not developing edge communities. This map shows the Thrive MSP 2040 community designations. So program participants fall within 4 community designations: suburban, suburban edge, emerging suburban edge, and rural center. And you might notice that some of the communities have multiple community designations, so they may be partially emerging suburban edge and partially diversified rural or rural residential. But as you'll see in the map on the next slide that shows overall platting activity throughout the course of the program, the sewered residential development is in that emerging suburban edge area where development can connect to the regional wastewater system. So this is figure 4 of the staff report, which shows, like I mentioned before, the overall platting activity around the region in the participating communities since the beginning of the program. And as mentioned, these are areas on the developing edge of the region that are within the metropolitan urban service area. And as you can see by the legend to the left of the map, those areas might be kind of hard to tell in this scale of a map, but the yellow and orange areas indicate platting activity that are in the earlier 2000s, and those darker blue and purple colors represent platting activity that is more recent. So in general, we're seeing platting activity along transportation corridors, planned and existing transit lines, and areas within a community where they still have room to grow. And as I go through the following slides, I'll provide a high-level overview of the analysis of both the 2022 plats as well as all of the data that we've collected throughout the life cycle of the program. And I'm going to highlight some key data points, but if you're interested in more information, that's all in the report that was attached in the agenda. So this slide shows the mix of single-family and multifamily units every year since the beginning of the program. In 2022, communities platted or reported 151 plats with 6,150 single-family and 5,037 multifamily units, and this represents 55% and 45% of total housing units platted last year, respectively. And that actually matches the overall platting activity we see, so the mix when looking across all housing units platted throughout the program. So compared to 2021, multifamily units in 2022 represent a greater share of total housing units, as shown by a nearly 1,700 unit increase in multifamily units and a 600 unit decrease in single family units. But given that information, these fluctuations aren't necessarily unusual because, as I mentioned, the proportion of single-family and multifamily units as a whole has stayed fairly steady at that 55-45 split. And altogether, program participants platted over 11,000 housing units in 2022, which is the highest number of units platted in a single year since the inception of the program. So this just surpassed the previous peak in 2003 with 10,589 units. You can also see in this chart that after that peak in 2003, there's a kind of gradual decline in housing units platted until it reaches its lowest point in 2009 with 286 units platted. And then you see that gradual increase over time, and that trend has continued in 2022. So this graph compares the actual units platted, which is shown by that light green bar, and the allowable range of units shown by the vertical lines. And this range is determined by the minimum and maximum density allowed by the land use guiding assigned to each plat. And we look at this information to evaluate consistency between platting activity and local comprehensive plans. So to further demonstrate this, if all 151 recorded plats in 2022 were subdivided at the highest allowable density defined by the land use guidings, there would be just over or almost 18,000 units platted, which is indicated by that point at the top of the line. And then on the other hand, if all of the 151 plats were subdivided at the lowest density, we would have about 6,700 units platted. But given that range, there were actually 11,187 units platted in 2022, and that is below the midpoint, which is about 12,300 units. But as you can see in this chart, throughout the life cycle of the program, the actual units platted has stayed right around the midpoint for the most part, and in recent years, we've actually seen actual units platted slightly below the midpoint, which indicates that communities are platting developments closer to that lower end of the density range rather than the higher end. So as part of this analysis, we also look at the net density of annual platting activity across all communities in the program. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we calculate that on the next slide. But I want to point out that we use net density both in plat monitoring, but also when assessing consistency or when reviewing planning documents so that our analysis only focuses on net developable acres. So I want to focus your attention on that top line, which is the green line, and that shows the overall net density in participating communities since the beginning of the program. And as you can see, while there's been a little bit of variation since the beginning of the program, the overall net density has been consistently at or above 3 units per acre, except for in 2009 when it was 2.8 units per acre. And that was likely due to the market downturn likely due to the market downturn. And then in 2022, communities reported an overall net density of 5.4 units per acre, which continues the upward trend that we've seen since 2018. So I also want to note that that while this data gives us some insights into development patterns of communities on the developing edge, it's only one piece of the puzzle. We also use various pieces of information to assess consistency with regional policy. So we look at plat monitoring data, but we also look at comprehensive plans, amendments, and sewer permits. How am I doing? Okay, I got 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
And as I mentioned on the last slide, we calculate net density when assessing consistency with regional policy. So we calculate this by taking out land considered undevelopable. So that includes wetlands and water bodies, public parks and open space, arterial road right-of-way, and land set aside for future development, which is what's captured in that other category and shown by the pink bars at the top of each line. So given that standard components of development like local streets are not taken out when calculating net density, communities are encouraged to take advantage of the land available for development with efficient platting practices. The graph on this slide also shows the breakdown of land consumption by use each year of the program, and we refer to this as land utilization. So in 2003, net residential acres represented the highest proportion of platted land compared to other years, meaning that less land was set aside for future development or other uses. And that's likely attributed to the fact that less land was set aside for future development, with only 5% shown by that pink bar. And then there was a pretty significant change in 2009 when a greater proportion of land was set aside for future development, which is consistent with the market crash and the uncertain development market at the time. And then since 2009, land utilization has been fairly consistent, with net acres representing just about 50% of total acreage each year on average. And then while in 2022 that wasn't it didn't stray too much from that trend, but the proportion of net residential acres platted was slightly lower than the average at about 40%. And that might be because we started to see communities set aside a slightly larger proportion of platted land for future development and other uses in 2022. And that altogether has led us to having that highest net density of development that we saw on the previous slide of 5.4 dwelling units per acre. I think I have 2 slides left, so I'll hurry through. And then in the past few years, we've added a section to the report where we analyze the amount of time it takes between platting a site and issuing a building permit, and this is referred to as lot absorption. So lot absorption shows the availability of platted lots and the community's capacity to issue building permits if the demand is there. So longer lot absorption indicates that more platted land is readily available for permitting and development, while shorter lot absorption indicates stronger demand and rapid growth in an area. And we track this information to help inform growth patterns, land capacity, forecasting, and permitting processes. And to conduct this analysis, we combined the permit data collected annually by the research unit with the plat data collected from local governments over the course of the program. And it's also important to note that the geocoded permit data only goes back to 2009. So this data represents analysis on only the past 13 years, as opposed to the full life cycle of the program. And then while the data reveals a wide range of lot absorption rates for individual plats, it ranges from 0 to anywhere to 20 years. This graphic shows that most plats received building permits within 2 years of the lot being platted. You also see that there's 11% for 0, and 0 indicates that a site was issued a building permit the same year that it was platted. I also want to note that we don't have enough information to know exactly why some plats only take a year to receive a permit, while others may take 10 years or more. But we do know that lot absorption rates are generally impacted by the economic stability and housing demand at that time. And this, like, the same goes for understanding why some plats take 10, almost 20 years to receive a permit. We don't necessarily have the information to make any assertions, but we can speculate that this is often due to a development proposal falling through, maybe because of financing issues or a change in ownership that then leads the site to be replatted later on. So we think that this phenomenon of high lot absorption rates has more to do with the individual developments rather than something systemic in the platting and permitting processes. And then in addition to looking at lot absorption as a whole, we conducted further analyses to break down this information by community designation and type of development. So the chart on the right shows the average time between platting and permitting by community designation. And this was the shortest in suburban communities with an average of 2.3 years and the longest in rural center communities with an average of 5.3 years. But it's also important to keep in mind that those communities only represent 7% and 1% of all permits issued for residential plats between 2009 and 2022. Most platting and permitting activity has occurred in the suburban edge and emerging suburban edge areas with 51% and 40% respectively. And then as you can see in the graph, platting and permitting, the time between platting and permitting has taken 2.5 years in suburban edge and 3.1 years in emerging suburban edge areas on average. And then finally, the chart on the left shows average lot absorption by the type of building permit issued. Since 2009, duplex, triplex, and quad developments have experienced the shortest amount of time between platting and permitting, just within 2 years. Townhomes have taken the longest amount of time with an average of 3.1 years, and single-family units, which represent the majority of units at 84%, have taken an average of 2.7 years. And this has either stayed the same or changed very minimally since our analysis in 2021. But with that, concludes my presentation. There are some county profiles at the end of the report if you're interested in some more detailed information on those. But with that, I'll answer any questions or comments.
Discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The old report had by city kind of the history of density as well, and that's not in this one. Do you have that data, and can we look at it? Because I kind of like that. It's good to help people understand how cities at different points in their development can have widely fluctuating densities. You know, if you only get one apartment building every 10 years, you got 1 year that's crazy, and all the other ones are kind of small. But the absorption thing gives you a good indication when you're over platting certain kinds of development. Before the crash, the townhome absorption rate went to like 30 because they had it platted and they weren't being built.
So Ms. Champoux.
Yeah, Chair, committee member, yes, that's definitely information that we can pull back together. It was just a change in the report for the year, but I can add that back in for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other discussion? Otherwise, great report, great work. It tells us a lot about what's really going on in the region. And my apologies to Mr. Anderson, who is going to report on the Agricultural Preserves Program. Director Barajas assures me that we'll move that to a later CDC meeting. So seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.